The rain pounded relentlessly against the streets of Abuja, turning dust into rivulets and muffling the usual city noise. Beneath a flickering streetlight, a boy no older than 12 stood trembling, his thin frame soaked to the bone. His clothes clung to him, heavy with rain, and his wide, searching eyes reflected nothing but despair. His name was Daniel, and in that moment he had nowhere to turn. Just hours ago, he had been at his father's hospital bedside, watching helplessly as the man took his final breath. His mother had died years before, and with his father gone, he was utterly alone. The landlord had wasted no time in evicting him from their tiny apartment, and every relative he turned to had shut their doors in his face. But fate had other plans. As Daniel wandered aimlessly, a sleek black Mercedes slowed beside him. The tinted window slid down, revealing an elderly couple in the back seat. Chief Edward Lawson and his wife, Margaret, had been close friends of his late father. The moment they saw his rain-drenched figure, they knew. "Daniel?" Chief Lawson's deep voice was laced with concern. "What are you doing out here alone?" Daniel opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. His tears told the story for him. Without hesitation, Margaret reached for the door handle. "Come in, my dear," she said softly. "You're coming home with us." Too exhausted to resist, Daniel climbed into the car. The warmth enveloped him instantly, but the fear of the unknown clung to him just as tightly as his wet clothes. Why were they helping him? Would he be a burden? As the car glided through the well-lit streets of Maitama, Daniel remained silent, unaware that this single night would alter the course of his life forever. Daniel sat in silence as the black Mercedes rolled to a stop in front of a sprawling mansion in Maitama. His heart pounded as he took in the towering gates, the perfectly manicured gardens, and the uniformed security guards stationed at the entrance. It was a world far removed from anything he had ever known. Margaret turned to him with a reassuring smile. "This is your home now, Daniel. You don't have to be afraid." Daniel swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he was afraid or just overwhelmed. The moment he stepped inside, the scent of fresh flowers filled his senses, mingling with the soft notes of classical music drifting through the air. The gleaming marble floors reflected the golden glow of chandelier lights, while expensive paintings adorned the walls. Everything felt surreal. "Come with me," Margaret said, leading him up a grand staircase. She stopped at a door and pushed it open, revealing a spacious room with a large bed, a study desk, and a walk-in closet. "This will be your room." Daniel hesitated at the threshold, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had never had a space like this before. Back in his father's tiny apartment, his bed had been a thin mattress in the corner of the living room. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret chuckled, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Of course, dear. You're part of the family now." But not everyone in the house shared her sentiment. At dinner, Daniel met the Lawson children for the first time. Richard, the eldest, barely spared him a glance. Cassandra, the only daughter, watched him with open suspicion. The twins, Nathan and Nicholas, whispered between themselves, casting quick glances his way. "So what exactly is he doing here?" Cassandra asked at last, her tone sharp with irritation. Chief Lawson set down his fork with a quiet but firm clink. "His father was my closest friend. He will stay with us." Richard scoffed. "So we're just taking in random strays now?" "Enough." Margaret's voice, usually soft and warm, cut through the air like a whip. "Daniel is family now, and you will all treat him with respect." Daniel kept his head down, gripping his fork tightly. He had endured worse. He could survive this too. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel gradually adjusted to life in the Lawson mansion. Margaret treated him like her own, ensuring he had everything he needed: new clothes, a place in school, and warm meals. Chief Lawson, though kind, remained distant, a man who expressed care through actions rather than words. The Lawson children barely acknowledged him. Nathan, Nicholas, Cassandra, and Richard acted as though he didn't exist, making no effort to include him in their world. Daniel threw himself into his studies. He was intelligent and hard-working, quickly earning the admiration of his teachers. He excelled just like the Lawsons' biological children, but unlike them, he had something to prove, so he worked twice as hard. One evening, as Margaret and Chief Lawson sat in the garden, watching Daniel read under a tree, Margaret sighed. "He's different," she murmured. Chief Lawson nodded. "Yes, He understands struggle." Margaret turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever accept him?" Chief Lawson exhaled slowly. "I don't know." Margaret offered a faint smile, choosing to hope. To her, Daniel was already family, her last child. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a bright, disciplined young man. He excelled academically, earning scholarships and numerous awards. By the time he was in university, Chief Lawson's businesses were more successful than ever, solidifying his name among Abuja's elite. Richard had taken over one of the family's companies and, with his father's wealth and influence, had built his own thriving business. Cassandra had become a renowned fashion designer, owning one of the largest fashion brands in Nigeria. With Chief Lawson's support, she had studied at a prestigious fashion school in London and been introduced to top designers worldwide, establishing her place in the industry. The twins had also carved their paths. Nathan had become a respected lawyer, while Nicholas built a lucrative career in real estate, owning multiple properties across Abuja. Meanwhile, Daniel worked part-time while studying, refusing to rely on the Lawson family's wealth. Chief Lawson and his wife were proud of how well all their children had done, including Daniel. One evening, as the elderly couple sat in the garden, Chief Lawson, lost in thought, suddenly spoke. "Our children have achieved so much, but something still feels missing." Margaret turned to him, curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Chief Lawson didn't answer right away. His gaze remained distant, filled with unspoken wisdom. He had always been a man of deep insight, and in his heart he knew the truth. Despite their success, his children lacked something far more important, a trait he feared they might never learn, and that worried him more than anything. One morning, Chief Lawson awoke to a nightmare plastered across every major newspaper. "Corruption scandal rocks Lawson empire, billionaire under investigation." The allegations spread like wildfire. Accusations of fraud, bribery, and financial misconduct dominated the headlines. News channels dissected every detail, twisting facts into damning narratives. Social media exploded with outrage, and public opinion turned against him overnight. At first, Chief Lawson dismissed it as a smear campaign, confident that the truth would clear his name. But reality hit hard. Investors panicked and pulled out. Major contracts were revoked without warning. Government agencies launched aggressive investigations, freezing assets and shutting down key operations. The once mighty Lawson empire crumbled within weeks. Worse still, their children, Richard, Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas, were nowhere to be found. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. The children they had nurtured and supported had turned their backs in their time of need. Then came the final blow. A court order stripped them of their mansion, their cars, and nearly all their possessions. The home that had once been a symbol of their success now belonged to the authorities. On a quiet morning, Chief Lawson and Margaret stood at the grand entrance of their estate, watching as the iron gates shut behind them for the last time. Their entire world had been reduced to a few suitcases at their feet. Margaret clutched her husband's arm, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" Chief Lawson exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the mansion that was no longer theirs. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, yet in the end he was left with nothing, except the bitter truth of who had truly stood by him. Chief Lawson and Margaret sat in a small, modest apartment on the outskirts of Abuja, a stark contrast to the grand mansion they had once called home. The furniture was worn, the walls bare, and the air thick with silence. Gone were the maids, the chefs, the drivers. Now it was just the two of them. Everything was gone. Decades of hard work had vanished overnight, leaving nothing but memories. That evening, Margaret picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her firstborn. Richard answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "My son," Margaret began, her voice gentle but pleading. "Your father and I—" "Mother, please," Richard interrupted, irritation lacing his tone. "I told you we're handling the business. You and Dad need to figure things out. I can't keep bailing you out." The line went dead before she could say another word. Margaret closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. She tried Cassandra next. "Darling, your father and I need a place to stay for a while." Cassandra sighed dramatically. "Mummy, you don't understand how expensive Abuja is. I'm barely managing myself." Margaret's hands shook as she ended the call. Nathan was next. He picked up almost lazily. "Yes, Mum?" Margaret forced a small smile. "Son, your father and I need a place to stay for a while." "Mum, I don't think I have any space available right now," Nathan said quickly. "My fiancée's parents are coming over this weekend and they'll be here for a while." Margaret's voice tightened. "Nathan, love, I understand, but you have other houses in Abuja. Why not let us stay in one for the time being?" "None is available," Nathan interjected. "They've all been given out. I wish I could help, Mum. I really do." I'll call you back," he said hastily, then ended the call. Margaret stared at the phone, her chest tightening. She dialed Nicholas. He didn't even pick up. A lump formed in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as she slowly set the phone down. Chief Lawson, who had been silently watching, placed a gentle hand over hers. Margaret panicked. "What are we going to do?" Chief Lawson didn't respond. His expression was unreadable, his mind deep in thought. With a shaky breath, Margaret picked up the phone again and dialed one last number. "Daniel, it's your mother," she whispered. There was a brief pause before Daniel's voice came through, sharp with concern. "Mother, what's wrong?" Margaret swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. We lost everything, my son. Your father and I have nowhere to go." Silence. Just for a second. Then, without hesitation, Daniel spoke. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." Margaret clutched the phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. No excuses, no hesitation. In that moment, she realized Daniel, the orphan they had taken in all those years ago, was more of a son than their own children. The night air was crisp as Daniel pulled up in front of the small, run-down apartment where Chief Lawson and Margaret were staying. The sight before him made his chest tighten. Two figures standing in the dim glow of a streetlight, their suitcases at their feet, their shoulders slumped under the weight of betrayal. Gone was the powerful man who once commanded respect in Abuja's elite circles. Gone was the elegant woman who had once been the heart of the Lawson family. In their place stood two weary souls, stripped of everything except their dignity. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped out of the car and hurried toward them. "Mummy, Daddy." His voice wavered with emotion. Margaret's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw him. "Oh, my son." She wrapped her arms around him, holding on tightly as though afraid he would disappear. Daniel embraced her just as fiercely, feeling the silent tremble in her frame. Chief Lawson stood back, watching, his wise eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. He had seen the headlines, heard the whispers, and even suspected the worst. But nothing could have prepared him for the cruelty of their own children, his so-called siblings, abandoning them in their time of need. Daniel exhaled slowly, then spoke with quiet certainty. "Let's go home." Margaret pulled back, her eyes full of uncertainty. "But we have no home." Daniel met her gaze and smiled softly. "Yes, you do. With me." Margaret's lips trembled, and for the first time in weeks hope flickered in her eyes. The drive through the quiet streets of Abuja was heavy with silence, broken only by Margaret's quiet sniffles. Eventually she spoke. "We called them, Daniel, all of them. Not one of them offered to help." Her voice cracked with sorrow. Daniel's grip tightened around the steering wheel. He had always known Richard, Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas were selfish. But this was unforgivable. Chief Lawson, however, remained calm. A small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. "I expected it," he murmured. "That's why I did what I did." Margaret turned sharply to him, eyes narrowing. "What did you do?" He simply smiled, saying nothing. Daniel pulled into the driveway of a well-kept duplex. Margaret gasped as she stepped out of the car. "Daniel, how?" The house was beautiful, modest yet elegant, with a neat front yard and warm lights glowing from within. It was nothing like the extravagant mansion they had lost, but to Margaret it felt like home. Daniel shrugged. "I worked hard, saved and invested wisely. I refused to rely on anyone but myself." Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears, this time not from sadness but pride. That night, as they sat around the dining table eating a simple but warm meal Daniel had prepared, Chief Lawson finally spoke. "My children have failed me," he said, his voice steady, "but my son did not." He turned to Daniel, his gaze filled with something deeper than gratitude, pride, respect, and something unspoken that had always been there. "You were never an outsider, Daniel," he said. "You were always my son." Margaret reached across the table, squeezing Daniel's hand. "And we will never forget this." Daniel swallowed hard, his heart pounding with emotion. For years, he had fought to prove himself, to belong. And now, in their greatest moment of need, he had shown them the truth. Family wasn't just about blood, it was about loyalty. And in the end, he was the only Lawson who truly understood that. For weeks, Chief Lawson and Margaret settled into Daniel's home, adjusting to a life far removed from the luxury they once knew. Gone were the days of housemaids tending to their every need, of chauffeurs waiting at their beck and call, of extravagant dinners served on fine china. Their new reality was quieter, simpler, but filled with something far more valuable. Love, peace, a son who truly cared for them. Daniel ensured they lacked nothing. He arranged their medical checkups, provided them with the best comfort his means could afford, and, most importantly, treated them with the respect their own children had denied them. One evening, as they sat together in the living room watching the evening news, Margaret turned to Daniel, a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "My son, don't you ever feel resentful?" she asked softly. "After everything we did for them, after the way they threw us away like garbage?" Daniel set down the glass of water in his hands and exhaled deeply. "Mummy, you raised them with love, but they chose greed." Chief Lawson let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "They think they've won, but life has a way of teaching lessons no amount of money can erase." And he was right. A knock suddenly echoed through the quiet house. Margaret's breath hitched. She turned to her husband. "Edward, they're here." Chief Lawson leaned back in his chair, a knowing smirk tugging at his lips. "Took them long enough." Daniel crossed his arms and watched his mother's expression. Even after everything, her heart still softened for them. Margaret sighed deeply. "They are still my children." Chief Lawson nodded. "Yes, and that's why we will make them face the consequences of their actions." Daniel walked toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate. When he pulled it open, he wasn't surprised to see them standing there. Richard, Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas. Richard was the first to speak, his voice uncertain. "Daniel, please, we need to see our parents." Daniel studied them, his gaze unreadable. They looked different, less arrogant, less untouchable. There was tension in their shoulders, hesitation in their voices. Only now, after everything, had they come back. Daniel held their gaze for a long moment, then finally stepped aside. "Come in." As they stepped inside, unaware of what awaited them, one thing was certain. The real lesson was only just beginning. The Lawson children stepped hesitantly into Daniel's home, their once proud expressions replaced with guilt and unease. The warmth of the house, the inviting aroma of freshly cooked food, and the simple yet comfortable setting only deepened their shame. This was not the cold, lonely mansion they had expected their parents to be struggling in. Margaret sat on the couch, her tired eyes scanning each of them, her disappointment evident. Chief Lawson sat beside her, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. His face was unreadable, his silence heavy with unspoken words. For a long agonizing moment, no one spoke. The weight of the past clung to the air between them. Cassandra, always the boldest, finally found her voice. "Mummy, Daddy." Her voice was soft, uncertain. Margaret exhaled deeply, shaking her head. "Do you know how it felt, calling each of you that night? Begging for help? And hearing my own children turn their backs on us?" Cassandra's gaze dropped to the floor. "We thought you would be fine. We thought you would figure something out." Chief Lawson let out a deep sigh. "And you were right." He exchanged a knowing glance with Margaret before turning back to them. "We did figure something out." Richard frowned, his voice wary. "What do you mean?" A slow, calculated smile spread across Chief Lawson's face, but there was no warmth in it. "We never lost everything." The room fell into stunned silence. Nathan blinked, confusion knitting his brows. "What?" Margaret leaned back into her seat, her expression unreadable. "We still have our wealth, our assets, and our power. We just wanted to see who truly cared about us when we had nothing." Cassandra gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Nicholas paled. You tricked us?" Chief Lawson's voice remained calm, yet each word landed like a hammer. "No. You tricked yourselves. You showed your true colours, and now you will live with the consequences." Panic set in. "Daddy, please." Richard started, but Chief Lawson raised a hand, silencing him. I am no longer your daddy, Richard. His voice was firm, final. A father is a man whose children love and respect him. You have proven that to you. I was nothing more than a bank. Margaret's lips trembled, but her voice held steady. We have already made our decision. Daniel, standing silently in the corner, folded his arms, still reeling from what he was witnessing. Chief Lawson took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. We have rewritten our will. The words rang through the room like a death sentence. We are leaving 80% of everything to the only son who stood by us in our darkest times. 4 pairs of eyes widened in horror. Daniel. Everything was going to Daniel. Cassandra let out a small gasp, shaking her head. No, this can't be happening. Richard's hands clenched into fists. You can't do this. Chief Lawson's gaze was cold, unmoving. Watch me. Margaret stood, her eyes filled with sadness, but unwavering. You threw us away when we needed you most. Now we are doing the same. Nathan fell to his knees. Mummy, please, we were wrong. We were selfish. Give us another chance. But Margaret only turned away. Cassandra, desperation creeping into her voice, turned to Daniel. Daniel, please, tell them to reconsider. Daniel, still in shock, looked at his parents, then at the siblings who had once ignored him, belittled him, treated him like an outsider. For the first time in his life, he was the one with the power. And he had no idea what to do with it. A month later, the family gathered in the sleek, mahogany-lined office of Chief Lawson's lawyer. The tension in the air was suffocating. Richard, Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas sat stiffly, their once proud faces now etched with regret and shame. Across the room, Daniel sat beside Chief Lawson and Margaret, his expression calm yet guarded. He wasn't here for revenge. He had made his peace. But the weight of this moment was undeniable. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses before opening the thick document in front of him. We are gathered here today for the final reading of Chief and Margaret Lawson's will. He flipped through the pages and began reading. As of this moment, 80% of all Lawson assets, including properties, shares, and businesses, will be transferred to Daniel Lawson. A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard's face darkened with fury. He shot to his feet. This is nonsense. You can't do this. The lawyer remained unfazed, continuing as if he hadn't heard the outburst. The remaining 20% will be divided equally among Richard, Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas. Cassandra gasped softly. We're still getting something. Margaret, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. Her voice was weary but firm. We are not cruel. Despite everything, we could never leave you with nothing. But trust, that is something you will never regain. Nicholas buried his face in his hands, shame washing over him. Mummy, Daddy, we were wrong. We're so sorry. Nathan let out a shaky breath, rubbing his temples. We really were fools, weren't we? Margaret wiped a stray tear. Yes, you were. But Richard wasn't done. His face twisted in disbelief and desperation as he turned to his parents. This is a joke. You can't do this to me. I am your firstborn son. Chief Lawson rose slowly from his seat, his piercing gaze locking onto Richard with an icy intensity. You stopped being my son the moment you tried to have your brother killed. A stunned silence followed. Richard's mouth fell open, his breath hitching. He had taken every precaution. The hitman had sworn secrecy. How did his father know? As if reading his thoughts, Chief Lawson continued, his tone laced with quiet authority. You're surprised, I know. The night Daniel was attacked, I hired the best private investigators. And guess what they found? He leaned in slightly. Records of your payments to the hitman. Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas recoiled in horror, their faces draining of colour. They had been selfish, greedy, and blind, but they had never imagined Richard would go that far. The office door swung open, and uniformed police officers stepped inside. The officer leading them spoke firmly. Richard Lawson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes wild. No, this can't be happening. You have no proof. The officer held up a stack of official-looking documents. Actually, we do. Panic set in as 2 officers grabbed him by the arms, pulling him toward the door. He thrashed against their grip, his face red with fury. This isn't over. I will get my revenge. But no one was listening anymore. Cassandra, Nathan, and Nicholas stood in silence, the weight of their choices pressing down on them. Without another word, they turned and walked out of the office, their shame too great to bear. Margaret let out a deep, shaky breath. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with emotion. Chief Lawson placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, his voice warm with pride. "Son, you are our only true child." Daniel swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. For years he had been an outsider, an orphan, a boy who never truly belonged. But now he was a Lawson. Tears welled in his eyes as Margaret and Chief Lawson pulled him into a tight embrace. In the end, he hadn't just inherited their wealth, he had inherited their love. And for Daniel, that was the greatest gift of all. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. Thanks, and stay blessed.